Alright, what about the art of siege? Tyre in particular. Let's see if I can find my chair and not drop a ton of metal on the ground. So, this is the earliest, chronologically, of the 4 Art of Siege games, and then there's the Constantinople, which fits kind of in the middle. This one follows similar rules to Acre and Constantinople in some ways, although, again, each of these is their own standalone rule set. And I've always looked at this one, and I said this before, as broken. I think I played it 3 or 4 times. Maybe once or twice solitaire, maybe 5 times total, I don't know. But very, very few times have I played. I mean, a lot of my newer games. Yeah, this is a newer game for me. I got this, I got it used. I got a deal on it, it turns out, I guess. Man, it doesn't seem like one. I got it about 15 years ago or so, a little longer, for $60. I've seen it sell at that level on eBay, actually, in the recent last few years. Which is to say, you know, like anything, if you sit around watching something, you can get a hell of a deal on it. So, you know, don't give up hope if you're looking for something like this and look over at Board Game Geek and see, geez, it only sells, you know, at $200 or more. Nah. Like anything, you can find it for a reasonable price. It's only got 4 scenarios, though. And as you can see, if you watch this playthrough, Tyre is kind of painful. Like I said, I thought it was broken all along. I'm convinced it's not in the sense that I thought it was, which is that it's essentially unplayable. First of all, the rules are bad, but they're not, and they include some new concepts, etc. in them. But they're not so very bad that, you know, if you add the errata to them, you can kind of piece together and figure out what you're supposed to be doing. And more or less play the game, maybe with a few decisions here and there, but you pretty much can get it down. It was more the playability aspect. The naval rules were very, very difficult to get a feel for. But if you see, my playthroughs kind of got through them, and after a few turns of it, I felt comfortable with it. I never think I felt that way before, so something's changed in me. Maybe, you know, playing Great Battles of History and then Flying Colors and stuff like that has gotten me more in the mood for these kind of slightly different systems that blow away some of my expectations, and I'm more comfortable with something that's doing so, even though I'm very uncomfortable with things that stray too far. I like innovation, but not too much innovation, I guess. But yeah, it was a workable game. And then I got to the land system and realized, well, I must have screwed everything up as the Macedonians. I think it's a hard game for the Macedonians. I think I said that in the wrap section, essentially. I think the tremendous burden of effort in the game is on the Macedonians. Tyre can do a lot to make the Macedonians' life harder, attacking the navies earlier than I did. I mean, I let them get away with some navies for a while that maybe I should have knocked out earlier. Once the Cypriot Navy comes into play, though, your time being able to influence the game as Tyre is just gone. You're largely either bottled up in your ports, or you're going to give the Macedonians such an advantage with those free landing spots that with easy walls to knock down. You really don't want to do that, I think. But as it was, there's 2 issues that kind of conflict with each other. I went over this in the playthrough quite a bit. One, and it's based on the map and the victory conditions. In order to win the game, let's turn this around. You have to be able to take both of these locations. And the map's nice, by the way. I like it. It's a, SPI era map, although my little discs as the rocks didn't work terribly well, and there's no counters for that. You have to come up with something of your own. Well, by the rules, you add it to the plotting sheet. So the fact that you have to take these two, this wall is impenetrable if the Tyrians defend it well enough. So if you land on this side of the island, they can block you off here. And if they're good about it, it's almost impenetrable. So they can come along the wall and start inching their way in, and then they can break into the city. So if they get complete control and hurt your army enough, they can make it in. Or vice versa from the city side. But my feeling was I got to strike both sides. And then I also added a third because this was the easiest place to hit. Well, dividing into 3 different landing zones, I thought that would work fine because it forces the defender to spread out more, to defend more territory. And it certainly had that effect. Whether or not I would have done better, had I consolidated my attacks on 2 or just 1 landing zone, it's hard to tell. I couldn't have done much worse with the Macedonians, though. I mean, I could have failed to land or something. But and here's the thing: if you make it all 1 landing zone, the Tyrians can throw all their catapults into that 1 zone, and therefore all your ships undergo the potential of being sunk. They can hit the meatiest targets every turn, and you'll probably have a backlog of ships that's quite deep with everybody going into 1 landing zone, which might be larger than what I had. So more ships will get tied up in it, and you'll be able to strike more with more density. By splitting landing zones, by splitting where my attacks could possibly land, it split where the Tyrian catapults went. But there wasn't really room for more ships to go in. I ended up getting bottled up in all the locations, except for that central attack. That actually could have used more troops. And I diverted troops to it. But that's where the heavy catapult defense was in place. I think that's where I had 2 catapults. And I suffered pretty big losses going in there because of that. Anyway, I think it's a really, really tough game for the Macedonians to win. And kind of an uninteresting game for the Tyrians. I mean, even making some mistakes in terms of not wiping out the Macedonian fleet early or whatever, there's just not that much to do. You're repairing the walls. That is a factor that stretches across a lot of these siege games. One person is doing something and the other person is just trying to prevent it. But some of them with mining and counter-mining and stuff like that in Acre, which you'll see soon, work out, I think, a little bit more interesting, at least to some extent. There's this tension and excitement about that. Here, really all the Tyrian player needs to do is decide what to fix and where to throw rocks and whether to fix boats or walls, and then to roll good dice. He doesn't have a whole hell of a lot of choices to make. And in a lot of ways, I don't feel like the Macedonians have a whole lot of choices to make. I just happen to have made them really poorly. And that's kind of one of the things. I like games where at least the general choices feel fairly easy to discern. Now, in this one, the information that the game historical notes give isn't definitive enough or explicit enough to really tell me what I should be doing, at least to mimic history. So I'm just, I'll do what I want to do, I'll do what looks good to me. I don't have any kind of guidance, and then from that to try to figure out what might work and what might not. And that's kind of a pity, but, I guess that's a lot to expect, although this was always a fairly, this was not a cheap game. These soapbox suckers always ran a decent amount of money, I know. And as to the components themselves, like I said, I like the map. There are charts on the map and charts on the back of the rule book. It's a little confusing to deal with them different locations where they are, but it's okay. You have this thing which you have to photocopy supposedly, and if you want to track the landing areas on that, but if you look at it, it's pretty dark. It would be hard to read. I found it better to just keep track of that information on the board. The rules themselves, as I said, they're kind of a mess, especially because of the 3-segment sequence of play with very different, set sequences within it. It's tougher to grasp a game that has that much built into it. It doesn't feel like that heavy a game, and it really isn't in a lot of ways. You're talking they managed to do this in 16 pages of rules, of which 6 of them aren't really rules, 10 pages of rules. Of course, SPI rules, this is kind of an interesting thing. They got 3 columns, each of which is like a page of rules in one of your FFG type games or something. So you got a hefty rule book by modern Euro standards or whatever. But for S&Ts, they ran about this size, and it's kind of impressive the amount of crap they fit in here in so few pages, in a sense. But obviously it was a rush job. The fact that you have a whole column of errata, some of which is pretty painful. Pre-pub errata, there isn't much new in there. And then you've got these weird diagrams taking up space here that just repeatedly show you illegal facing for some reason. You show it once, that's good enough. Screw-ups on the counter sheet. You have some miscolorings, misstripings, etc. There's also not really enough counters to damage all the walls properly. You can get around that. I think everything else probably had enough counters. Might not be enough exhausted markers. There are enough pin markers, though. So, you got a little bit of a limitation there, but you can work around these things pretty easily. It is a little annoying, the different colored counters, the wrongly colored counters. Sometimes I got mistaken as to which ship was which. So what you've got actually is, one of the most interesting sieges of all time, with what I think is kind of a clunky system to represent it all. The presentation and delivery of the rules of the counters. My presentation and delivery. Some people like to complain about that, and I can't blame them. But the presentation and delivery of the counters and rules is substandard for SPI's, standards at that time. And then there is a clunkiness to the game itself. The way the naval movement, the alternating turns, who goes first. First of all, it creates these weird situations where you're really thinking too much about the geometry, because you can set up an attack on one move and then you immediately get the next move. So you are always getting these double turns in it. And too much of it is about geometry. And then when you look at the board, there's kind of this annoying situations where you can attack from one hex, from 2 hexes away, but not the hex in between there, all at the same target, just because of how you line things up. Wherever you start, just situations that don't make sense when you look at them rationally. But you know what? I can pass those off as kind of the abstraction of, it may not be that easy to hit an enemy ship with your ram, and, well, okay, so you have to do geometry that's not similar to what the actual naval captain would have to do, but the effort in doing that may represent the difficulty in sailing a ship or something. I don't know. The point is that it actually isn't that difficult. It's more fiddly difficultness, or difficulty. You've got to make sure that you move your admirals last, because if they move first, all your other ships get left behind. You can't have them leading the fleet. On the other hand, they can sail up and then give command, give orders to a ship in the lead that was far ahead of them, so they can kind of leapfrog and give orders. So there's all this kind of weird stuff that doesn't feel right at all. But eventually you get kind of used to it and it starts to work. And on the land segment, in the land combat, again, it feels a little clunky. It doesn't feel like it fits standard procedures in war games very well. You can't retreat through your own units, stuff like that. Although you can walk through your own units. And again, I understand kind of what that's meant to represent. A route doesn't work through a formation, but a formation of hoplites, there's enough room in the hex for one to pass another, so there's some allowance there or something. I don't know. There's sort of the let's limit the movement a little bit, but not exceedingly much. Anyway, what it ends up doing is making it very, very hard to get your toehold on the island and to press forward. It makes it quite possible for the Tyrians to throw things back. My feeling when I first looked at it was, all right, if I get a good landing, I should be in. I should be able to take the area that I'm in, either the city or the other area. If I get a good solid landing, then that secondary wall becomes a serious issue. But it doesn't work out that way. The way it works out is the Tyrians have a pretty damn good chance of holding you back, at least with the landings that I achieved, which was really only one, what I would consider decent lodgement. But it's very hard to move past that. The zones of control are very rigid. They prevent you from advancing into the situation. The other games in the series don't require that you fight your way out once you get through the walls, if I recall correctly. There may be some exceptions to that, but Constantinople certainly. Once you enter the walls, the game is over, man. And I think Acre's the same way. The city just surrenders. So it all becomes defense of that outer shell. Do I find that more interesting? Maybe a little bit. More realistic? I don't know. Something in me, and I don't know. Something in me really wanted to fight out the fight once I get within the walls and to have it still be something of a challenge. I feel like this game makes it too much of a challenge. The other ones just kind of gloss it over and say, well, you're in. It's over. You breach the walls, you start sending real amounts of troops in. It is over. And that's true in most sieges. In this case, though, the city itself is only a portion of the island. I'm sure the rest of it's populated, just not very densely. But it becomes less of a guaranteed thing. You have these two goals that you have to get, and the defense could rally around either of them. And they have a defensive wall protecting them in either case. Anyway, I had more fun with this than I've ever had before, which is to say I think it's risen my rating essentially from like a 4 or a 3 where it was kicking around before, with this thought that this is a broken game to, I'm not really sure, but I think it's certainly a playable game. And then beyond that, I think it may actually be an interesting puzzle how to get the Macedonians, so that they have a decent chance on their final assault. What has to be done in that case? Will I remember enough to be able to do what has to be done the next time I play? I don't know. And maybe it's not possible. I can't tell you that for sure. But I've certainly, one of the things that helped me get excited about this and think, maybe I'll be able to play this and help put me in the mindset that it's not just completely broken. There's a couple of people stated this was their favorite out of the series, that they played a lot of this back in the day, of Tyre. So, well, for me it was always the weakest of the series. Acre's a so-so game. We'll be hitting that next. But I think this is up to almost that so-so level in my impression. If it could get a little, if I felt that it was certain that the Macedonians could create a chance for themselves by playing better than I do, if I felt that that was a reasonable assumption, and actually I don't care if the defender can win somehow. Historically, Alexander won. If I thought there was a decent chance that the attacker could win in this sucker, I would feel more disposed to put it on the same level as anchor. Gonna put this one up.